Hi everyone, and welcome to the My Best Divorce Basics learning series. My name is Christopher Bruce, and today is Lesson 3, Learn the Basics of Divorce Leverage and Strategy. Our objective with what we're going to be learning today is to discover how people make decisions in a complex divorce and how to avoid the most common strategic errors that can complicate divorce. Strategy in a divorce is critical. A sound divorce strategy gives you the best chance of resolving your divorce situation on fair terms as soon as possible. If you end up becoming involved in a divorce, it's usually not the first thing you ever envisioned happening in your life. It's not a pleasant situation usually to go through, so you want to design a strategy that helps get the divorce over as soon as possible and on fair terms and in a manner that allows you to have the best divorce possible. The problems that can happen when you have what I call a faulty divorce strategy is you can end up with a lack of negotiation leverage. Your spouse can end up having a lack of any incentive to settle the divorce case, which makes the divorce in many instances a longer experience that's harder to resolve, that is more expensive, and creates a process that creates a higher chance of damaging your family, your relationships, and your business and career. So just as a little bit of an overview before we get into some more specifics, you need to realize that the best divorce strategies that we're going to cover are not always engineered for short-term enjoyment, but the strategies are designed to get your divorce resolved on fair terms as soon as possible and in a manner that minimizes long-term impact on your family. So realize that if you have a failed marriage, you're sometimes going to need to have a divorce strategy that requires you to act differently. If you want a successful divorce, you're probably not going to be able to do all of the things you did in a failed marriage. Not all of the strategy tips we're going to cover will apply to you. And with your divorce strategy, this is one of the things you need to make sure you discuss with a qualified divorce lawyer before you act on anything. One of the things that's critical to a divorce strategy is understanding how people make decisions in a complex divorce. If you understand what will drive your spouse's divorce decisions, you are able to create a better divorce strategy. It's just that simple. For most people, the first priority is going to be their safety in a divorce. And what I mean by that is they're going to want to make sure they have a place to live, a roof over their head, and their basic expenses and needs covered. After that, their second priority is going to be typically stability. And what that means in the context of a divorce is more money almost all the time. In other words, they want to feel comfortable that they're going to have a stable platform for doing the things they want to do in their life when the divorce is over. The tricky part is your spouse may not always know what those things are, and the quicker they figure them out, the better, which is why the first step I urge everyone to take before going into a divorce is to get their own act together, so to speak, and their priorities set. Once the basic safety and stability needs are met, your spouse's needs are going to turn to preserving their relationships and reputation. Some of this may sound a little bit familiar. It derives from basic psychology. There was a psychologist named Maslow, and maybe I'm even pronouncing his name. I didn't become a great student of psychology. I went to accounting school before law school, but Maslow's teachings are essentially what is behind understanding how your spouse is going to make decisions in the divorce. And if you understand where those decisions are going to be focused on, you can design a strategy that is best appropriate for getting your divorce over quicker. And if you really want to boil this down, usually the way it works is once there's enough money to go around, your spouse is going to be most concerned about their relationships with their family and career and their reputation among the people that they perceive as thinking highly of them or wanting to impress. So best divorce strategy tip number 1, move first, unannounced, and don't back off. When you file for divorce, you should be the first mover. That's how I see it. When you do this and you keep pressing the divorce, moving forward to the settlement and ultimately the life that you want, it creates a psychological advantage. Your spouse is going to feel like they're in reactive mode. And what this does is it can keep spouses from hiding the money, doing divorce planning, and having time to do the things that make divorce complicated. So the point here is be the first to file for divorce. Don't blow your cover before you do it. Have all of your ducks in a row. Do all the things that are recommended in this course and by your attorney. File for divorce, and then your spouse can know about it. They'll see that you're prepared. It's just going to make it more likely to get everything over with quicker. Make sure once you start the process, don't stall and back off at the request of your spouse if you really want to get it over, because that's just going to give them more time to cause problems. This type of a strategy requires you to make sure that you know divorce is the best option before you go through with it, and that's something you have to think very hard about. But once you are in the game, you play until the game is over and be the first to arrive. Divorce strategy tip number 2, do not create short-term cash flow problems. You're going to be at an extreme disadvantage if you're worried about your short-term cash flow when you're trying to negotiate your divorce settlement. Your divorce settlement is the most significant financial transaction of your life, and you do not want anything clouding your judgment. And if you go out and create problems with paying your basic necessities, it's going to be a problem for you when you're negotiating. And this is both for spouses who control the money and those who are dependent upon their spouse for support. If you are the so-called wealthy spouse, if you have to spend down your assets during the marriage, you're going to be incentivized to make a bad deal because you're going to be watching your assets go down. And that's not a good feeling. You're going to want to do anything you can to get this over with. And if you're in that desperate state of mind, it's going to be much harder to make a fair deal. Unless a big part of this is really where you're living, unless there's violence or in continuous fights in front of children, it's usually best not to move out of the house and create a new set of expenses unless you have the financial resources that make this possible without even giving you a second thought about the expense. Divorce strategy tip number 3, do your best to control the money and the documents. Be proactive to avoid allowing your spouse the ability to withdraw all of your available cash resources before or during the divorce process. And try to get access to the financial documents and records of the marital relationship before your access is cut off. And as it relates to getting the documents, we have several different lessons coming up that go into that in detail. There are methods for getting the documents when you're not the one that controls all of them, and we'll go over that. But the important thing here, and this is something you'll need to discuss with your divorce lawyer, is making sure you have a so-called war chest for the divorce, that you're not going to be cut off and left without the ability to pay your expenses. Sometimes requires a little bit of a maneuvering through yourself or the lawyer right as things are coming together at the beginning of the process, and there's plenty of legal ways to go about doing this. Divorce strategy tip number 4 is recognizing that a terrible divorce settlement is not going to save a failed marriage. Sometimes people enter into what I call nice guy or nice gal agreements. They're overly generous settlement offers, and the root motivation behind doing this for these people is trying to win their spouse back. And I'm going to tell you right now, this never really works. It sets you up for tremendous problems after the divorce and will only lead to you being very upset and aggravated and possibly financially destitute to a degree down the road when you realize that your spouse isn't coming back. Remember, when you're negotiating these divorce settlement agreements, there is no money back guarantee. If you wake up in a year and realize you made a bad deal, almost 100% likelihood you're not getting out of it. These divorce court judges want cases to be over. They do not want people coming back later to do their divorce again because they think they made a bad deal. Don't let you be that person. Remember that you're going to have a life of your own after the divorce, and you don't want to financially strain yourself to the point of you not being able to live that life. This is especially important when you're paying something called alimony or child support. If it's a future obligation, you need to make sure you're not giving away all of your income just to try to make your spouse happy and make it look like you're the nice guy or gal, so that maybe you win them back. If you're going to win them back, it's going to be after the divorce, and it's not going to be if you're a pushover. One of the things that goes along with this strategy is making sure you don't discuss settlement options with your spouse, at least with any specifics, until you've had time to sit down with a divorce lawyer and realize the exact specifics of the law of where you live. Because once you tell a spouse or promise your spouse a certain type of settlement, it's going to be very hard to quickly get them to accept something less down the road. And we're going to go over in the coming lessons in quite some detail how the law works, and you're going to need to talk to a lawyer in the area where you live to figure out the exact specifics and how the judges look at it, how your judge looks at the law, because it usually does vary. Best divorce strategy tip number 5, realize that guilty conscience agreements go in your favor. What I mean by this is that if your spouse has a secret, a dark secret, they may want to settle before the secret is discovered, so to speak, in the lawsuit. And what I mean by that is this: lawyers conducting their due diligence, doing the things that they should be doing to properly represent you in a divorce, end up learning a lot about your finances and your situation. And if your case goes to the point of being prepared for a trial, which for most people will not happen, thankfully, especially if you follow all these strategies and what your lawyer tells you. But if the cases go beyond the typical exchange of documents and settlement discussions, most of the secrets in the closet are going to be coming out just as part of the lawyer doing their job for you. So, spouses who have something to hide or have maybe some things they've been doing that they don't want discovered in detail or exposed are going to have an incentive to get things over with. And you know what? That's a good thing, because the whole goal here is having your divorce resolved as soon as possible, getting a fair deal, and moving on with your life. So when it comes to guilty conscience agreements, being in a situation where your spouse has a secret, don't blow it. Get the undeniable proof of what is going on. Your lawyer will help you with that. And keep your knowledge of this private. Don't tell your spouse everything you know until the right time, if necessary at all. Remember also, while the existence and discovery of these so-called secrets can help resolve your divorce early on and on fair terms, you can't cross the line here. There is a crime in most places called extortion, and you can't be doing that. It's not a give me everything and I won't tell anyone about your secret type of a strategy. It's more of a there's something that's going to come out, it's going to possibly be explored in detail as part of what's necessary to have a divorce trial. Why don't we just settle now for what the fair term should be? More of that type of thinking. But you need to go over this in detail with the lawyer that you consult with and hire, because you don't want to get across the line into what is considered extortion or any other type of a crime. But you can do all of this legally in a manner that it really encourages everything to be over with quicker, which is the goal. Divorce strategy tip number 6, and we're about through most of these here. This tip is expose your spouse's affair and keep any of your new relationships out of sight. A lot of people think that affairs are not important. There's no use in knowing about them. And, under the law, that might be true in many instances with a few exceptions, but we're not talking about the law here. We're talking about negotiating a settlement that gets your divorce over with so you can move on quicker. And in that context, affairs can be very important. Depending on the exact specifics, it is usually helpful to document your spouse's relationship with another person if it was going on during the marriage. There are ways this can be done by your attorney and a private investigator to where you don't even know the exact details of it, but it allows the details to potentially be brought out in a negotiation at the right point in time. And when that happens, it can help get everything over with quicker. And also, for people who suspect a spouse is cheating but don't know, if that's very important to them in their decision to get a divorce, one of the things I commonly recommend is spend some money on a private investigator. Have them follow your spouse, and you might see that they're having an affair, or you might see that they're not. And that might make you feel more confident about the marriage and possibly stop listening to these lessons on how to get divorced. And that's really what I'd like to have happen for you, if possible. Not always possible, but it's something to think about. Another part of this strategy area is if you get into a new relationship, if you're having an affair, or after the divorce starts, you start dating or get involved with somebody else, don't flaunt it to your spouse. Don't tell it to your spouse. Don't tell it to other people, because guess what? It's not going to help you at all. It's going to cause problems. New relationships during a divorce case, it's only going to complicate things. Your spouse is not going to wake up and say, oh, you know what? I'm happy for you. You're dating somebody else. Usually they get angry. When they get angry, it's more difficult to get everything over with. I'd advise you to stay away from new relationships until the divorce is over, especially if you are going to be seeking alimony or paying alimony. But if you are going to have a new relationship, and I know sometimes it's just what has to happen, keep it out of sight. Never lie about it, but don't flaunt it and try to keep people from knowing about it. Divorce strategy tip number 7, the last one we're going over here, is really just 5 basic mistakes to avoid making. And mistake number 1 is do not underestimate your spouse. They know you better than anyone. They may never paid attention to anything important. They may not know anything about numbers or finances or bank accounts, but guess what? If they're in a divorce and they're angry, they're going to become a forensic accountant, and they will be interested in everything because it all comes back to what they're going to get. So don't underestimate your spouse. Number 2 should be a no-brainer. Keep your divorce strategy private. Don't tell people what you're planning to do, what you're going to do in the divorce. It doesn't help if the secrecy is blown, your strategy is blown. This could be more expensive and take longer. And another thing to keep in mind, you might start planning the divorce and then realize you don't want to follow through with it. And you've already talked to people about it at that point in time. It just is not helpful for your life moving forward. This especially relates to those in business. If people start realizing you're going to have a divorce coming up potentially, even if you reconcile, they're not going to want to do complicated business transactions with you because they're not going to want to be dragged into your divorce through a subpoena from one of the lawyers. A lot of people who have been through that process are very wary of it. Don't tell more people than you need to. Always remember that bank statements leave a trace. Cash does not. If you're doing something, it's going to show up in your bank records. Also, another strategic error. We talked about it a little bit, but error number 4 is do not negotiate with your spouse until you know what is fair. At the very least, consult with the local attorney and understand what should be the basic guideposts of a divorce settlement. Once you tell your spouse you're going to give them something, it's hard to pull back from that later. It's better to start lower and move higher. Another concept that should be obvious, but some people miss it, especially in the so-called baby boomer generation, is you need to understand everything you put in writing, whether it's an email or text message, or some greeting card from 10 years ago. It's going to be used against you, especially if it's on the internet. I do it all the time. Download all the text messages, download all the emails. I keyword search for things that are important, go over it in great detail. Be careful what you write. If you're writing it, assume a judge could read it, especially if there are children involved. You better not be writing things that are nasty and show you as a bad parent or a bad person. It's just not helpful. Don't do it. Just as I'll usually say, the so-called legal disclaimer, remember that what we're going through is not a substitute for a competent divorce lawyer. Consult with a qualified divorce lawyer before you take any type of legal action. Just listening to this course online is not enough. Also remember that what we're doing here doesn't create any type of attorney-client relationship between yourself and Christopher Bruce's law firm. You can also find out more information about my law firm if you're interested in talking about this personally more for a divorce in the Florida area. Anyway, thanks for listening and be well.